I realized though is I have actually seen the movie.
You've seen
Oh.
it?
Yeah, I saw it like a long time ago,
Mm.
but I don't like remember everything. So it's almost like it doesn't really matter that much, but
Hmm.
like I have seen the movie, so in some ways I sort of knew a little bit about it going in,
Hmm.
but it's much more dense than the movie also. And the
Yeah.
movie was just like kind of strange because everyone's white, so it's weird.
Oh, interesting.
It's like Meryl Streep, Glenn Close, Jeremy Irons playing Latino, so it's weird.
Oh, dang. I like how it's her first novel. I didn't know that. I listened to like a little bit about the book before the book actually started. So I thought that Hmm.
Mhm.
because I've only read one other Isabel Allende book, but I really liked it. So I wonder like why I have not like explored more of her work as an author, but this is a good segue into that.
Yeah, I was saying it feels like a novela, even
Mm-hmm.
though reading the little intro or the little description in the back or the front, wherever the books have it, um, I kind of knew what we were going into, but not until like obviously Blanca and what's his name? Pedro the Third, Pedro Tercero. They're growing up that I'm like, oh, that's the love story, or that's the love affair that's forbidden and stuff. And I kept thinking it was um Esteban and Clara. But then
Mm-hmm.
it's like, no, they gave us so much detail into how it all started. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm way more invested in that way. And I don't know, I feel like in other books, I'm kind of questioning why are we even going into this? But now I understand it here. I'm like, oh wow, I see the importance of every little detail. It's
There's
like,
a big level of detail, yeah. Kind
yeah.
of like Gabriel Garcia Marquez a little bit too, but it's been a long time since I read anything with magical realism, but I do like it. So interesting how Claire is like. Gonna talk more about like chapters 1 through I think
Hmm.
3 because I think I got through 3.5, but I like reading about like her powers and everything and how it's just like normal, and I think that's pretty interesting. I feel like I did predict that she was gonna end up with, or I was feeling like she was gonna end up with Esteban, but um I didn't know if it like that it was going to happen in that way. I guess I thought it was interesting how she was like calling him clairvoyantly.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm getting very strong 100 Years of Solitude vibes, but like
Right.
it's like 100 Years of Solitude, except like more accessible
Mm-hmm.
because
Definitely.
I feel like that 100 Years of Solitude is more like poetry sometimes, whereas this is very like matter of fact for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I did I again like I'd kind of forgotten like what happened in the movie, so a lot of it is like coming like the first time, but
Mm-hmm.
I kind of thought that because they were basically framing it like he like would never love another woman and all that, that like he would be really cruel to Clara, but it was like interesting that he actually like fell for her too. And that was like it didn't bring out a good side of him either, but like that I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. I was worried for her when it said like when they had like the ring exchange or something that the spirits were trying to tell her it wasn't a good idea. But since it's such a long book, I feel like that's the repercussions will probably come like in the next generations or something.
Yeah, the whole
Yeah.
like ring exchange, I was like, I think when that section ended and then they started talking about like, oh, they're starting to plan the wedding. I was like, was that not the wedding?
I thought it was
In my
22.
head, I was so confused. I'm like, what? But I guess it was like the little full engagement ceremony in front of close friends. But I'm like,
And then the bad omen of the dog dying, that was pretty intense.
that
And then
was
he made a rug
so
out of it. I'm like, why would you do
so intense.
It's
Just
crazy.
thinking of my dog showing up, like pretty much dying, and that was intense.
Yes.
I'm liking the book, but I just don't know what direction it's going in. And like that kind of, doesn't make it like a page turner for me.
Mhm.
kind of like just la 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 going along.
Which
And
is
then I I was reading a side book, so then I kind of forgot about this book, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have like two more chapters.
I feel like it is a lot. Like I like it, but I could have finished so much earlier and I kept falling asleep. Not because it was boring, just because it's just so much.
Mhm.
And I don't know, I kept rereading was one page for like an hour. And I think it's one I was tired and I was like cozy in my room, but still I'm like this should not be happening. So I agree that it's not a full on like page turner where you're like, I must finish. It was more
Mhm.
like, okay,
More
where are we going?
aspiring. I am curious. It does also remind me of I think it's been proposed a few times, Pachinko. That one's like a multi-generational saga as well. But I wonder because I wonder like how many generations it's going to go through and then what's going to happen to the last people. Because I feel like we haven't read as many of these books in book club where it's like multi-generational and then how does it end? Like sometimes is what my brain goes to when it's like focused on a couple, if it's a romantic book or just a protagonist going through challenges, then it's like problem solution. Okay, the book's over. So I'm kind of wondering what's going to happen at the end of this one. So, yeah.
Yeah, like if you think of 100, and just referencing the same book over and over, but if you think of that book, it was almost more about like these are the patterns that this
Mhm.
family has had for years and years, and like it wasn't like it led to somewhere necessarily. It was more like about the like seeing how the everything repeated itself, sort of, and they couldn't
Mhm.
escape stuff.
Thank you. That.
But with this one, I don't know if it's going to be something like that or if it's more like everything led to something at the end, kind of a thing. Like the bad omen maybe will lead to something like in future generations, or I don't know.
Or maybe like a curse. It also reminds me of Encanto with like how it's describing the rooms of Clara's house when she was little and the courtyards and everything, like the architecture. Also, the sister-in-law is very weird. Like how she's like trying to listen and like peek on them. I'm like, that's gross. And I'm like, it's like for this type of book, I'm just like comparing it to Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I'm like, okay, there's not that much incest at least, but that was pretty gnarly. I'm like, okay. I'm
Yeah.
listening to Enrico's like, what's happening? I'm like, don't worry about it. And he
Yeah.
walked in right on that part. So it was really funny.
Yeah, I did not see that coming. I was like, oh, maybe she's trying to be protective, but I was like,
I feel like she's in love with Clara a little bit, but it's like
yeah,
can't act on it because older generation, and then she's already married and stuff like that. So because
yeah.
she's never got an opportunity to explore her own relationships.
Yeah, that was one thing I did remember from the movie because it's Glenn Close that plays that character.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, she was pretty memorable because she kind of plays it like they are in love, or like that she is in love with her. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the implication in a way. Like in
Yes.
general, that character never got to do anything for herself because she took care of her mother, and then clearly maybe she was in love with a woman and couldn't do anything about that either. So very sad character the way it ended for her.
Oh my god.
Mhm.
Yeah, like first she was taking care of her mom her whole life, and then she like enjoyed taking care of Clara, but then her brother like said she couldn't and kicked her out.
He's just so intense. Like the fact there was a line where he was like I want her, but it's not enough. Like I need to control her. Like I want her to be like madly like obsessed. And I'm just like
Mhm.
how he is with her. And I'm like, what? You're too much. And then when he basically said, get out or I'm gonna kill you if you ever come back here to the sister, I'm just like, that's your sister, dude. But
I feel like his character is going to devolve as the time goes on, but we'll see because he has a bad track record. I think like the Omen because it happens to like on the ring exchange, so
mhm.
like I was very like worried at the beginning that he was gonna like be abusive towards Clara and things just because of how he had acted before in the past.
Hmm.
But, like maybe with more time going by, maybe more of that will come out. Hopefully not, but who knows? So he definitely doesn't seem like stable. And then like it is like a time of like really big like machismo, which I think she does a good job of describing.
Especially as they're going back into they start talking into more of like the Tres Marias as you'll get there when they're talking about like
Mm-hmm.
Blanca and Pedro.
The kid, right? I think
Yeah,
the kid.
tercero. I was like
Yep,
kind of in
yeah.
my head. Um, and like obviously the son is way more like trying to be like an activist, but it kind of goes against everything that Esteban wants for this
Mhm.
community to not change. So
But he
yeah,
made like a little like a practically like a mission, right? Like when the colonizers came and enslaved the indigenous people. I feel like he kind of has that vibe going on, especially with the coupon system that he has. It reminded me a lot of like when I don't know, I don't imagine this still happens, but back when there was like a bigger need for migrant workers and migrant workers from like different communities coming in. I think sometimes too they would have a system like that where they could get little coupons from the store, but then they were always like in debt to the store of the farm owners. I think it comes out in what is that book we read, Katie, for the history class by John Steinbeck? It's the
Um,
Wrath. It's
not
in Dubious Battle. I think it kind of talks about that in that book too. And it's like meant to like keep the working people like stuck, in their cycle of poverty and all that. And the priest at the beginning was interesting too. And I feel like stuff like that still happens in some places in Mexico. The priest in the town where I go to stay with my uncle, like the townspeople don't really like him because he's pretty rude, and says inappropriate things. Like I think one time a lady wore like a red dress to church, and he was like, "How much for the hour?" And then also, it gets really hot, right, and humid, obviously, and he doesn't want people to be fanning themselves or anything like that because he'll tell them off like in front of everybody. And there was another padre who wasn't good, so they complained and like got him. And now the whoever's the next like level up from the church has said like, well, if you guys complain about this guy, then you're just not going to have like a priest, and you'll have to go to church like the next town over. So they haven't like said anything else, but they don't like going to church because of that.
that's interesting that
Mm-hmm.
especially because I mean I'm not religious, but I do know like the heads I don't know if he's a head of the church, but of their church, like they're supposed to be kind of like a role model and
Mm-hmm.
someone you can go to for advice and guidance. But that's you would think that they would want to try to work with them instead
Mm-hmm.
of
It's
Yeah.
just weird, like in such a small town, like you only have the one option, you know, like the one religion, the one priest.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy to think about that.
Yeah. And it's like very important to them, so it's just they're kind of stuck. It's interesting. Also like the machismo, yeah, still really strong. I met a lady in Mexico who's like a family friend, and she's kind of like an artist, and I guess she's retired now, but she does like art um as her hobby to keep her busy. And she was telling me that she used to be like a journalist and she used to write for magazines when she was working, and that she really wanted to write about how awesome the women of another town are, um, because where she lived called Tapalpa, and she wanted to kind of like write an article about them, highlighting just like how hard they work and they provide for their families and help alongside with their husbands, and they take care of things. And people were like, no, you shouldn't write that because then all the men are going to get like mad at their wives and just think like it's an insult to them because the man should be like the one providing. So it'll like take away from like their ego. So she was telling me how it's like sad that things are still like that. It's interesting how kind of those themes come up in the book too. Like I feel like there's a lot of interesting themes.
Yeah, like Esteban, he's like
Mhm.
super sexist and doesn't think women should have rights.
Exactly.
He started off like so, like, you know, like when you're first hearing about him and Rosa, he's like seems okay, and then you're like, oh no.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, what? And then he becomes part of the bigger story, and then you're like, oh no. And it just becomes more problematic with everything else. But I was going over some of like the lines that I underlined,
Hmm.
and I think when he kicks out, how do you say her? Ferula?
Perula.
Ferula. Um, she says, I set my curse on you, Esteban. You will always be alone. Your body and soul will shrivel up and you will die like a dog.
Ooh.
So I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like this is like a whole foreshadow of what might end up happening.
What
I
if he
know.
dies like Clara's dog and gets stabbed in the back?
How did that happen? I'm still kind of like,
I low-key thought it was a grandma for a bit because remember how she killed the parrot, but then I was like, no, I think so much time had passed that she could have killed the dog. So I don't know
but
how
then
what happened to the dog.
wasn't there a weird section when they were talking about the dog that the dog was always with Clara?
Hmm.
And then he started growing up, and then like when other dogs were in heat, that's the only time he would leave. I was like, why do you mention that? I found out so weird. And now that like they're gonna get married, it's like she's actually finding a partner. I'm like, why are we having this like dog disappear like that? Or like,
Oh, maybe it
yeah,
was like supposed to be like her protector, like
you
dogs
know, I
guardian too, and then they're like can't be both. So maybe the author was just like, let me take him out in a
one
way.
off. But
That's
I don't know. I was like, why? Why? I'm like, I don't know. It's weird.
I wonder what would have happened like if the dog stayed and maybe I mean I'm glad that Esteban wasn't being so horrible to Clara, but
Mhm.
maybe he wouldn't have liked that she had like this close relationship with a dog given like how sexist and fragile his ego is. Some people could be like that.
Yeah.
So maybe then he had to be taken out for the story to proceed. Who knows?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I think he would have like kicked that dog out.
He'd been like, mm-mm, she's mine and only mine. That is
Either way, he would have ended up a rug.
that. Okay,
That
so
was
that
brutal.
too.
Like, no.
He's over here like, yeah, look down. Oh my God.
It
Why?
just shows how like off base he is in terms
He's-
of like actually knowing her, right? I think that's what it meant to illustrate, but yeah, it was kind of sickening.
And then sister's like, I told you she wouldn't like it.
Yep.
That was so sad, so weird, and just also funny. I'm like, it's so. Mm.
I think like yeah, some things are like exaggerated to the point of like they become comedic just because they're so out there, I guess.
And also the way, I don't know if you got to the part where the mom's head. Did you
Oh
get
yeah,
that?
I did. I got a little bit past that part, I think. Let me see.
And then I think it ended up staying in the basement, or did they do something about it?
I don't think if she finds it, I haven't gotten to that part yet. I got to midway through chapter 4.
I don't think they just said they had to hide it for a while, but they didn't really resolve that.
Yeah. So like it's still there. Like in the present time.
Mm-hmm.
I think they said future generations discovered it.
Grandma's head chilling in the basement. But
That's the thing too. There is
maybe,
little details like that that I was trying to figure out the whole like family tree, who was related to who. And as
mhm,
I went back, there's certain lines that obviously in the future you get to know more about who they're
mhm.
talking about. But when you're reading it, you don't know the characters yet or the description they're talking about until like you go back how I did and I'm like, wait, they told us. They told
Mhm.
us this would happen. They told us like,
There's a lot of clues. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm
Mhm.
just like, should I be rereading this? No. And I was like, that's too much work.
I
Yeah.
read the book before listening to the audiobook, but I've just been a little bit pressed for time these weeks. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do the audiobook. And I'm surprised because I thought I wouldn't be able to like catch all those things in an audiobook. But I think it's because I haven't done anything else really today but except listen. But it's like there's a lot of little clues, like when Blanca and the little boy meet each other, it's like they fall asleep together, and then it was like, oh, and that they'll be found that way later and get
Oh,
in trouble for it or something. I was like,
yeah.
oh snap.
Yeah, and sometimes it's like a few chapters later, and then that one I think was like pretty soon after
Ooh, okay, okay.
they said that.
Mhm.
Oh, but when I said that in the generations to come, I meant the dog, not the head.
Oh,
Oh yes.
oh, oh.
But maybe the mom and the dog could become like part of the spirits that are in the house too, right? And they would always want to take care of Clara, I imagine. So I wonder like who are the spirits is my question. Is it like
Mhm.
past generations? Is it random spirits that were there before? Um
I think it's also interesting that when she was pregnant, it
mhm,
was like she was normal,
mhm.
or like, was it, or was it the opposite?
Back to like her most normal self, is that what you
I
mean?
think so. I think
Mhm.
so.
I
Because then
think
they're
you're right.
like, oh, she's pregnant. But
Mhm,
then when she wasn't, she was kind of like, paying attention to the cards, paying attention to
mhm.
the table and like asking questions and stuff, like very spiritual stuff, except when she was pregnant. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I thought that was interesting.
There's probably like some cultural stuff maybe that's like, if you're, pregnant, maybe you're closer to like the third eye or whatever, like the curandera stuff. I have to ask.
It was weird that when she discovered like Clara and the guy were hooking up, like that's when they had the earthquake. Or sorry, Clara discovered Blanca and the guy were hooking up, and then that's when the earthquake happened. So like, did she cause the earthquake?
Part of me wants to believe that she has these like powers that what movie? Oh, like Wicked. I was like, what did I just see? Where it's like, the feelings and then like they're
Emotion.
Or like Encanto too.
yeah, yeah, where they are not fully in control of their emotions and they have these
Mm-hmm.
powers that they also don't really know how to control. And I'm like, what if it was like her getting mad, like, oh my gosh, no, and then shake. Which that's intense because a lot of people died. But then she also saw that like as a vision that it was going to happen. So,
It goes back to the beginning, right? Where the book was saying she was just predicting stuff, but then she stopped talking because she was afraid
yeah.
of what she could say that might cause harm to someone else. And it
And
does she can move stuff as well as being able to predict the future. So,
I think in that moment, in that specific, like the beginning section, it said that she could see those things, but she
mhm.
not necessarily cause them. So I don't know if that's a clue saying like she could cause it or saying like no, it could never be. She
Or
just
maybe as she
went
grew
through it.
up, like her powers develop and she can do more too. Like how Matilda had to kind of practice when she would move stuff and she could move heavier stuff. That's intense.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they didn't like she didn't seem to have a reaction to that. Like it didn't say, oh, she was upset and then there was an earthquake. It was just like, oh, at the same time.
Yeah, I took it as she was upset because she's like, oh, she's not opening the door. Let me go outside, let me see where she's at, kind of thing. And it's like, but obviously that's how I'm taking it. I don't really think she's shocked or anything. They didn't say.
I'm curious now. I'll keep listening straight after book club.
Yeah, there's been moments where I'm like, oh, she's pregnant already. Um, but we'll see.
What's been happening?
Yeah, because Esteban doesn't know, right? And he doesn't like him because of his union activity.
Hmm.
Maybe that's the curse.
Maybe that's his curse too. But then there's parts where it's like Esteban is talking directly to the reader and it says that stuff his granddaughter tells him or something, right? So I wonder if that's the child or if there's more grandchildren later.
Yeah, because we haven't heard much about the twins.
Except like the boarding school situation. That was like, oh, that's interesting. And then just like the whole that they have a different accent. I was like, it's interesting that they decided to do that with them and not Blanca.
Maybe it's because they were like sexist and they thought like maybe the boys needed to go learn more and like learn how to be like independent.
Although I think
Or
Clara did say that the boys were dumb and her daughter is lovely. Some
that's why
moms
they
like
because
that.
they're dumb.
Wasn't the daughter at a convent?
I think after the earthquake, no? Which makes me feel like it makes me believe that I think that's why the mom may have been like mad or upset or like like kind of like not agreeing with her jumping out the window and then meeting with the boy. Um, but obviously they don't say that. But that made me believe I was like, something is off here.
Mm-hmm. Oh, interesting.
Because I don't think she was there the whole time. I think it was after the earthquake. But she's wild. Faking all these illnesses that she starts to believe they're real. I don't know. That's that's wild. So it is entertaining. It's long, but it's entertaining.
Yeah, it is. It is like a novella, like you said, Judith.
Yeah. Which I had no idea was a movie. So now I'm like even more intrigued to see how the movie um
Yeah,
follows.
the movie is not well regarded,
Oh, okay.
but it still might be worth seeing. Like it has a bunch of really big actors in it, but has like Winona Ryder. Winona Ryder plays Blanca.
Oh.
Meryl Streep plays Clara. Glenn Close plays Padula. Jeremy Irons plays Esteban. Oh, and Antonio Banderas plays Pedro. Wait, the Tercero. That guy. Pablo Pedro Tercero. I
Pedro.
forget his name.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of big people in it, but it's weird
Well,
because they're
why
all
are they
white.
all? Yeah, I was gonna say, why
Yeah,
are they all white?
I don't know.
Me
It's made in
neither,
like
me neither.
93, so I think back then they were just kind of like, eh.
Oh,
Hmm.
It's
I
like
didn't
an
know
older
this
movie.
is like that old.
Yeah, I thought
Yeah,
it was
the
like
book
the
is
last few
from the
years.
80s.
Yeah, it's her first novel. So she's written quite a few books. Let me see. I'm gonna look up the dates exactly. Houses.
Sorry guys, I gotta head out early actually, um but I'm sorry that I've not been able to come
Oh,
as
no,
much recently, but I am keeping up with the book this time, so I will be here for this month, unlike the other two.
no
No
worries.
worries.
Whatever you can, you feel free. I'm not gonna be like, ugh.
No, but like I've been sad that I haven't been able to join,
Oh,
so I'm
we
I'm
have
back.
missed you
We're
though.
glad to have you back though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
All
take
right, I'll
care.
see you guys next
Bye.
week. Bye.
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 All right, 1982.
The book?
Mm-hmm. And
Wow.
also was first written in Spanish, so I kind of am
Yes.
interested to hear it in Spanish too, because she is from Chile, I believe.
Are you listening to it in Spanish?
No,
Okay.
um, it probably would take me. I mean, I think I could still fully understand it, but it would take more a little slightly more thinking.
I try to see if Libby had it in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
I can read it in Spanish, but my library did not.
I wonder if mine does. But also like the translation though I feel like is pretty good because it goes very smoothly. The
Yeah.
only part where I'm like, oh yeah, this like doesn't make as much sense in English was when something about when it's trying to talk about like the girls in puberty at the beginning. Um, I was like, oh okay, it would make more sense this way in Spanish, but in English maybe a different word would have been better. But it's pretty good. Let me look it up. Let me see. Yeah, I tried reading Cien Años de Soledad in Spanish, and it just listening would probably be better than reading it, I guess.
So I haven't read that book. You're saying the style is kind of the same, as in
Yeah, because it's
it's
like very intergenerational. It has lots of magical realism. I feel like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, though, he does put like a lot more like random sex stuff in his books. That's and I feel like this book has it, but it's not like to the same level that he does. Oh, they do have it. But it's very much similar, but I like this one better. I think Gabriel Garcia Marquez, like I can see why he's famous, but um sometimes it's just like really repetitive to the point where it's like you can't really understand what's happening and it goes back and forth in time a lot. Like it's very fluid, so it's hard to tell what's going on, which is crazy. But I had to read it for my Spanish class. I didn't read the whole thing. I read bits and pieces of it because it's really long. And that's the one that I never read it fully, but I had to write a paper on it. I kind of cheated though because I had the English copy as well, and I would skim like for the quote I wanted in English, then just quickly find it in my Spanish book because there's no way I can do this in time.
Yeah, Paula and I read that in high school, and that was definitely one. I think the book had like a family tree, and
Mm-hmm.
it was definitely where I had to
It's
keep
way more crazy than
referencing.
this one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this one there's a lot of characters, but like it's very, it's pretty clear. Like
yeah,
I
you
can
can
remember
track.
their name.
Mhm.
Yeah, a little confusing because then like Blanca's lover has like the same name as his dad and grandpa, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's a little confusing, but I
And
guess also easy.
that's where I needed to do the tree and go back because of
Mm-hmm.
Pancha. And Pancha was the first I'm gonna say girl because I think she was young.
Yeah,
That
she was 15.
Esteban um
Also, maybe you guys know if this has happened yet, you can tell
had
me.
kisses.
But all his other like illegitimate kids, are any of those ever gonna come out from the shadows and be like, okay, dad, I'm taking my revenge since he never like claimed me or something? Maybe that will be part of his curse.
At first, I thought the lover was going to be one of his kids, but then they're talking about the dad. So,
Ooh.
That is why I went back because I'm like, are we about to see some incest right now? Because I
Oh
was
my
very
gosh,
confused.
that could
But
happen.
Pancha is so Pedro Tercero's aunt. So Pancha is sisters to Pedro Segundo, and Pedro Segundo is the dad of Pedro Tercero. So I was
Mhm.
like, oh no, no, no. They're related, but it's like,
Not blood. Okay, that makes sense.
yeah,
Hmm.
is not the firstborn that Esteban had and was like, whatever. Although, hey, what if he comes back? Because they don't mention anything about him
Hmm.
or about her. Was it a guy or a girl? I can't remember. I don't think they said. Mm, but
So
getting
many
twisted,
possibilities.
getting twisted up in here.
I feel like this would actually make, rather than a movie, it would make a better like telenovela adaptation. They should redo it.
That'd be cool.
it's almost like short stories, like each
Hmm.
chapter, because they're not like they don't totally relate, or I don't know.
And there's a lot of passage of time in between as well.
And I feel like each chapter has a name
Hmm.
and fully goes with that um title.
Yeah, I do like the organization of it that way.
Yeah. Which I feel like we haven't had many of those recently. I feel like there's been a lot of just like long chapters or just like one, two, and like I like that there's names, especially because my brain starts going. Like once the lovers was there, I was like, oh, oh, here we go, drama.
You're right. I think most of the books
Yeah.
just have the numbers or Roman numerals or part
Mhm.
one something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it gives
And
it more
now it
detail.
says the revenge is
I
next or
know.
something.
I'm just like, who?
I think like someone might guess. I think that Esteban should end up getting like stabbed in the back like the dog. I feel like that would be like a that's like I feel like it must the stabbing of the dog has to mean something beyond it just
Mhm.
I think.
It's just so dramatic and so
Mhm.
like out of nowhere that I feel like it has a meaning. Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I can't wait to learn more.
The next section is 6 to 8.
Six.
Don't read 9.
Got it.
Ooh, exciting stuff.
I thought it was gonna be a little spookier because it's called The House of the Spirits, but I like it. So,
I I've wanted to read this book for a while
mhm.
because it's the first one, and I was like, well, let's see how they started. I haven't read any book of this author, and I don't know why I feel like it's turning out better than I expected.
Her
I
books
felt like it
are
was gonna
really
be
good.
I don't know why I felt like it was gonna be boring and it was gonna be more spooky in a way, not really like this.
I think Daleen has read more of her books though. I've only read Violetta, which I randomly saw at the library and I grabbed it. And
I think she
it
has Eva Luna.
oh yeah, that's another one I think Daleen has mentioned. Yeah,
Yeah.
but she's very, very gifted.
hmm I like her
Yeah,
stuff.
it's like refreshing because it's different than
Hmm.
like what we've read, but I can see similarities kind of.
With the 100 Years.
Yeah, the 100 Years, and I don't know. I was trying to think of our other books, like maybe even Anatomy, that Anatomy one. I don't know. I was just like kind of getting the storytelling kind of aspect.
Oh yeah, like the language.
Yeah,
This is our first magical realism book too, which is cool, right? It's like a big Latin American
Mhm.
thing.
yeah, yeah. So I'm enjoying it. It's just kind of nice. It's like different, and
Hmm.
like a lot of our modern books are all kind of similar. So I feel like this is
Mhm.
definitely standing out. Like,
I do like this one too. What you said reminds me, Julie, that I feel like it's not quite like a historical fiction text, but it is set in like such a different time. It does illustrate like how things were back then, especially like in a different country or Latin America. Because sometimes like when I go to Mexico and I hear like little stories, I'm like, would that like really happen? But it is true, like how you know, men would like pick up their wives and just be like, oh, here's a random girl in the countryside. That did happen a lot. It's scary.
Yeah, that's good.
Hmm.
Well, we'll see what happens up to chapter 8. Do not read 9. We'll see you next week. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Everyone.
good night.
Night.
Mhm.